A very, very warm welcome to everybody. We're delighted that so many of you have registered for this introductory call about this visionary project. My name is Nicholas. I've been studying with Thomas for about 5 years now, and I'm a member of the core team that is supporting the Pocket project. In my professional life, I run transformational leadership programs for senior executive teams worldwide. And since we know that there will be many of you who will be hearing or seeing Thomas for the first time, before I hand over to Thomas, I'll just give a very brief biographical introduction. So Thomas Hübl is a contemporary mystical teacher. And he was originally working in the medical profession and followed a strong inner impulse to start meditating in his 20s. And this led him to take a very radical step of conducting a 4-year solo retreat. So he retired from the world and spent 4 years deeply exploring meditative states, different levels of consciousness, studying, of course, intensively. And towards the end of those 4 years, he went through a profound awakening experience, and this in turn brought him back into the world, and gradually he began his teaching mission. And that was about 15 years ago, and since then his work has helped, influenced, affected thousands of people worldwide through various formats, both in person and online. And Thomas is really bringing the deep mystical wisdom of the timeless wisdom traditions into a modern context. One of the very unique features of his work is that he brings us both to the highest levels of consciousness through different kinds of meditative practice, and at the same time, he allows us to work very nakedly, very directly with the darkest, we might say, the most wounded parts of ourselves. And this is all brought together into a very coherent and integrative whole way of working. And Thomas has always had a very strong calling for healing work, both individual and collective. And in the past, he's already run very big healing events for up to 1,000 people in Germany, and sometimes joined by Israelis as well, and really working on the residue of World War II. So this has for a long time been a big calling for Thomas. And over the past year, we've initiated this very visionary project, the Pocket Project for collective and intergenerational trauma integration. And Thomas is bringing extraordinary mystical insights into the nature of collective trauma, which I know he'll talk about this evening. And at the same time, the project really looks to find a marriage between the mystical insights and then cutting-edge psychology, psychotherapeutic methodology, and also scientific genetic and brain research. This is all very much part of the vision of the project. So it's my pleasure now to welcome Thomas. And Thomas, I'm going to suggest that we begin by diving into a couple of questions that I'll put to you about the work. And the first one is that, I've heard you say many times now that essential though individual psychotherapy is, and no doubt always will be, the world is in such a state of challenge and upheaval that we really need to find a much more collective form of therapy as well. So my first question would be, why is this so important now? What are the effects of collective trauma? Why is it so important now to work with collective trauma? And also from the mystical perspective, what is collective trauma? So welcome, Thomas, and looking forward to hearing you and also having dialogue with you.
Well, thank you, Nicholas, and hello and welcome everybody. Yeah, Why is it so important? Like on the one hand, I know most probably many people that are listening right now, and but also many people in the world that explored healing therapy, also the after effects of trauma, know that from a scientific point of view, from a therapeutic practice point of view, we already collected in a way a lot of material knowledge and also methods how to approach trauma in a human being, in an individual. We know what are the effects of trauma onto the nervous system, how this relates to our daily interactions with the world, how it affects our relational capacities, how it affects our kind of relational intelligence. And at the same time, we all, or many of us, have been born into a field or a legacy of big trauma, which means the Second World War or slavery or apartheid, or right now the war that's going on in Syria. A huge trauma impacts onto a human being, onto a culture, like a whole cultural space. And so if we are part of that experience, at least we know what we are part of, and we also know what might be some after effects of what we experienced. But in a way, when the next generations come in, so the next generation is being born into a field or a legacy where we haven't been actively or consciously part of those circumstances. And I think it's highly interesting, and that's also, as you, Nicholas, mentioned it before, the reason why I at all started to become aware of this dynamics is because I saw collective discharging processes in bigger groups of people, that basically the same collective eruption happened just in different groups. And so I witnessed this for 12, 14 or 15 years, I don't know. And so we after some time, I thought, wow, that's interesting. There's actually a pattern in the group process that is very similar, but just the participants in the group are different. And so then I really started to explore and research that, and this led up to the fact that we did large-scale group events in order to look at and that was mainly in Germany, or between, as you said, between Germany and Israel, how to look at the after effects of World War II and the Holocaust. And but basically, since I've also looked at it in other areas around the world, and therefore I think on the one hand we could say the vision of having one client, like to see the world as a field of complexity that has many scars, and those scars have effects in us. And also latest scientific research on Holocaust survivors and also other research shows that actually there is an epigenetic impact of trauma. So literally there is an effect how we pass on traumatizing events in us, because trauma is an experience that I have. So that impact on me is something that obviously in some way we pass on. And I believe, and that's also the reason why I think we need to take the work onto a collective level, that there, as much as we understand about the individual aspects of of individual trauma, the collective dynamics, the collective agreements, and the collective structures in consciousness that we might be deeply identified with might not be in our awareness. I often say, I believe that many of our cities are being built upon a dark lake. and the dark lake is unconscious energy. So millions of people dying in a world event, in deep atrocities, that experience and the energy of those experiences, this is sitting between us in an unseen way. This is affecting our daily lives. And I believe that collective trauma has a much, much bigger impact on health, on social, economical, political world events. That collective unconscious material is much more part of our daily life experiences. And as much as we might be skilled in identifying individual trauma symptoms in people that we work with, if somebody is skilled and knows what to look for and how to detect trauma, so skilled people know how to do that. The question is only if we are as much skilled when we look at political events. Right now, the world is full of events that I believe are also symptoms of collective traumatization / and or collective shadow material that is erupting. And I believe that that the research and the exploration and ways of working, understanding deeper Buddha integration methods or possibilities, so that we as a we space can take care of our own life base, of the hurt that is sitting with us in the room and that we are being born into, and often the questions that we don't even know where to look or where to search for answers for the difficulties that we have in our lives. So that, I believe, means that we are on the verge to jump into a bigger understanding. And why we are doing that now is because the very technology that is part of us having this conversation right now is also the evolutionary pressure or the engine in the evolutionary time that we are living in, that most probably for the first time the world is being connected through an external brain. There is already a new holon or a new system that is bigger than all of us, that we are already part of, that enables us not only to have a communication worldwide, but I believe that creates a strong pressure onto the collective unconscious lakes to appear. So on the one hand, we might say, wow, there is a fast technological progress. We all, or many of us, use it in our daily work processes. We also might be stressed out by it because information is speeding up, technology is speeding up workflows and work processes and the amount of information that gets to us. But just by using a mobile phone or a smartphone, an intelligent mobile phone, gives me the possibility to participate in many, many world events if I want to. Most of the news feeds of current world events appear on my phone within maybe minutes, sometimes, when they happen. Which means actually I, as a global citizen, am part of a technological access point that enables me to be a global citizen. The question is, do I have the inner capacities to live a global citizenship? But the technology that I carry around with me makes me actually a global witness. And I think the fact that the time that we live in, the whole scientific and technological development, and world issues like global warming or other global issues that we are facing right now push us into a certain development. And I believe the unraveling of the collective breaks, the collective regulation functions that we implemented in our culture in order to protect ourselves, not to be flooded by amazing amounts of unconscious material. I think that is part of our evolutionary time. So same as when an individual went through a heavy traumatization in their development, so most probably that traumatization will be experienced as difficulties, challenges in my daily life, and will point me towards kind of an inner work that I have to do in order to restore. Most probably the simplest way to say it is to restore my relation to the world. And if the collective traumatization is a similar thing, just on a much bigger stage, so then it means that the we that really feels called to and cares for it, needs to step up and say, we have something to look at. The Holocaust, slavery, apartheid, the Middle East wars or the Far East wars are enough signposts to step up and say collective wisdom is going to take care of collective trauma, because we understand how much, on the one hand, innovation and evolution, and on the other hand, collective traumatization creates a tension. And that tension lives within us. The tension lives within our nervous systems. The tension lives within our cultural processes, within our institutions, companies, intimate relationships, and the way we do education. So I believe there is a strong, strong calling, and you can see that I have a strong passion for it. But my sense is evolution is pushing us into that direction. There's something ripe. And with many people all around the world that I talk to, collective trauma and collective trauma work seems to be something that is latent, in a way present in us as a topic that we feel called to look at. And that's why, on the one hand, I think the exploration and the deep kind of research, multidisciplinary research of collective trauma is needed, but also finding ways how we spaces can become a fertile ground to, on the one hand, research and also practice integration methods that really work. On the other hand, start to walk towards a restoration. When you look in an intimate relationship and there is a wounding and there is some hurt that happens, how do we restore the intimacy? The intimacy is being restored by really putting attention there, allowing to feel each other, which means to restore our relation, to be able to witness each other, and to take our relationship through an evolutionary process into something new. And my sense is that we are being called on a world stage, on a collective stage, on a political stage, that we are being called to go for that restoration process. Because we manage to inflict upon each other a lot of pain as human beings. And I believe in order to grow into a bright future, a future full of potential and potential-oriented growth, I believe we have to restore the intimacy, that the concept of being a stranger is going to be transformed into kind of a global web, an integral global web. And that's why I think we feel, many of the aspects that I mentioned now, I think are reason enough to feel that something is ripe, and that I believe we will find answers about health issues that we cannot yet really explain or treat, that some of the answers are lying like as pearls in the dark lakes of our cultural unconscious fields that also form cultural unconscious agreements where we confirm in each other that that's real. And that's why I think we are, I think a movement, an initiative like the Pocket Project, or basically any multidisciplinary approach to research collective trauma is very, very much needed. So maybe I hand it back over to you, Nicholas.
Yes, great. Thank you, Thomas, for that overview. And maybe before we talk a little bit in detail about the different parts of the project, let's dive for a moment into that word restoration, because it's such a core part of the work. And, while we know relatively quite a lot about what happens for an individual to go through a restoration process, I don't think we know so much yet about the collective possibility. And I know also from what I've experienced working with you on collective topics that you have a very unique way of both conceptualizing, but more importantly, working with the kind of deeper levels of the fabric of collective trauma issues. So can you say something about this and how this brings us at least towards restoration when we can work at that deeper level?
I believe that many of the answers that we are looking for are dwelling amongst us already for thousands of years. I mean, giving wisdom traditions holding in their cores, like many, many answers. And of course, we might see many interpretations and interpretations of interpretations around it. But in the core, like since thousands of years, wise people have walked this planet, and there are a lot of pearls there. And one of these pearls, I believe, is that restoration always happens when whatever act is nakedly revealed within the highest consciousness. Which means usually, let's say somebody is dishonest in an intimate relationship and lies to his or her partner and has an affair outside but isn't really open with it. And so there is a time of kind of inner distancing, because in order to lie, I need to distance myself. I need to step out of the deepest intimacy that we are able to live. And I actually need to contract. So from that moment on, I live my life in a deeper contraction until I feel enough how much pressure and pain this might create in myself, and it might create in my environment. So eventually, I'm willing to restore it. But when I restore it, I need to go through fear, maybe through shame, through shaming, through conflict, through all kinds of things, in order to open up and potentially restore the relation. But usually it doesn't happen without going through certain phases. And I believe that when we take the process of restoration, which is actually a process of restoring intimacy with life, so that we can live with an open, vulnerable heart, and that we are emotionally connected, and that we're related to our environment. Lots of the trauma work is restoring a relation to myself and restoring a relation to my environment. And so when nations inflicted atrocities upon each other or to certain groups within a society, so I believe a similar process is needed. We actually have to go through the layers of shame, fear, guilt, whatsoever, in order to find a deeper intimacy of restoration. And in the mystical practice, we add actually another layer. We say the past is only the past if it holds energy that has not been restored yet. And therefore, the past appears as body sensations, emotions, thoughts, difficulties in my life, and appears in my life as a limiting factor. It's kind of you go to the movies, you see a movie, and you see advertisement or commercials being projected onto your movie. So you see commercials onto the main movie, which means most probably you won't get fully what's the main movie about. Today, some of the past fears come up as fears in decision-making processes, come up in doubts that I'm not sure about my potential, I'm not sure what's my life purpose. There are many, many commercials being projected on top of the main movie. And the main movie is the current experience is my capacity to be present and include the past and the future in my now. So usually when we are not able, when we live through trauma or strong conditioning, we exclude, which means we feel separate. We don't experience ourselves as an integral part of life. So we feel a bit alienated, we feel a bit distant. Our minds and our feelings might hang around in the past or in the future, but basically it might be hard for me to be here. And it seems like very simple to be here, but great mystics taught us that actually real presence sounds very simple, might be maybe one of the hardest things in the world. And so the full availability in the moment is something that needs restoration. And we know that life has this amazing built-in mechanism. When somebody doesn't know, okay, where is my shadow work and my trauma work that I have to do, we will find out through the difficulties that we run in when we experience our daily life. Because if we really tend to the difficulties, we see signposts into our unconscious areas. And if we commit to practice that and to really look at it, we will do our shadow work anyway. And that's also true for our cultural agreements. That's also true for our political landscapes. That's true for social dynamics and we dynamics. And therefore, my sense is that in the restoration process on the larger stage, the collective stage, similar principles are at work. But my sense is that same when somebody really does a deep piece of healing for him or herself, that something fundamentally changes in this person's life. So when we do our inner work, we have the capacity to have a course correction, that our life will expand into more potential, more aliveness, the capacity to manifest more of one's life purpose, to be more related, have healthier relationships, and create a healthier becoming and a healthier belonging. And the same is true for us as cultures, that I believe when we as culture go deep enough into the restoration of collective trauma and shadow processes, we actually can create together a collective restoration, which is a collective course correction. It's a kind of a global learning possibility. And I think that makes it really exciting because we might reveal together the possibility to change, literally to change some tendencies that we drag with us for thousands of years. Since thousands of years, we go through similar cycles of warfare, of atrocities, of torture, and other things that we seem to drag with us. And where is the learning curve? And of course, there is a learning curve, but my sense is a deeper learning is waiting for us as a pearl within the collective trauma field. And that's why I think that's a level of research that needs to be done and that I'm very passionate about. And I know that a growing number of people that I know is passionate about.
This is a topic that more and more people feel drawn to. It's incredible everywhere I go, and I know everywhere you go as well. And I just thought it would be good, Thomas, to talk for a moment about the actual word pocket, because I remember when you first said, I want to call this the Pocket Project, I didn't immediately understand. And I still also, people say to me, why is it called the Pocket Project? So can you say something about in this context, the deeper meaning of the word pocket?
Yeah, first of all, my wife, Judith, one evening she came to me and said, my sense is that's a good idea, the pocket project. And I said, the pocket project? And then we talked about it, and like to insert pockets of presence, clarity, and healing into a field, or to establish those pockets within a field that potentially is collectively traumatized, which means we are looking to through a similar distortion in the windshield of our car. So if the windshield of your car is straight and clear, you will see the street clearly. But if the windshield of your car has distortions, the road might not be straight for you. The road might be also distorted because we see it through glasses that are distorted. And my sense is that when we look through collective trauma fields, we might confirm in each other the same way of looking at life or at reality. So that's one thing. The Pocket Project is a kind of an attempt of people that practice, explore, research together to create pockets of clarity and integrate from within more and more collective trauma material. So a growing pocket of clarity is growing in different areas around the world, because I believe that there are universal trauma principles, but then there are local specificities, so that the trauma in India and the trauma in Argentina and in South Africa and in Serbia and in the Middle East has different colors, different qualities, although we go back to the same universal trauma principles, most probably. And trauma also always develops capacities in life that are actually amazing capacities that get developed. And that's why I think the research, okay, what is the impact of the trauma? What is the impact on following generations? But also what are the capacity that people develop that live in crisis areas, in war zones, in hot areas, in conflict areas? So what does life develop? What's the evolutionary potential within such a field? And I believe when we look right now into Europe, and especially into Germany, we can clearly see, I believe, that there is the wave of refugees coming to Germany, I believe, deeply triggers and activates an underlying dormant trauma field of, let's say, at least the Second World War. So trauma structures are being reactivated through people that come right now out of an area and come with a traumatization of war. And I think that's why it's so crucial and also such a chance, because if we work with it with the right tools and the right understanding, we can, instead of creating more alienation and more hate and more isolation and distance, we can literally integrate something, because now it's active. But when it's active, as human beings, we know how easy it is to project our own pain onto other people. And then it's clearly about them instead of about us. And when we can reverse that and see, wow, I remember the echo of the echo of the echo. And I will own the remembering of my echo that lives in me. So then we don't create more alienation. We actually use the situation to create more healing and integration and more collective wisdom. And I believe that's a deep calling right now, not only in Europe, but especially right now here. So that's why I think the collective trauma work, and even just the spreading the information that for governments and governing structures and institutions, collective trauma is an important thing, that that's something that we have to take care of. I think just the kind of PR of collective trauma as something that really needs our attention is crucial. And so that's certainly a part of the Pocket Project, but I think that's a part of that new research, and as, of course, when it's scientifically well grounded, so then it's also much easier to bring it onto a public stage. So I think that's the work that we have to do.
Great. Yes, thank you, Thomas. So let's maybe talk a bit about the scope of the project and the different parts of it that you envision, which I know are everything from small groups working around the world to huge healing events. And then we can also start to talk about the training. But maybe just to give your view of the different components of the whole project, which are quite far-reaching, also the research.
Yeah, well, I mean, as you said, we call it a Pocket Project. It's a non-profit project or initiative where we come together, and first of all, people who feel called and who also feel called to develop integration methods, to develop research methods, to research collective dynamics. It's not so easy. So we will need to be very innovative and create ways how to look at, measure, find out together and research together what actually are the impacts of collective trauma, what are the impacts of integration methods. So on the one hand, we want to develop a whole stream how to work with it. When in individual integration work, we find ways how to work with it. What are the ways that we can apply on a much more collective level in large-scale group events that are healthily grounded and safe, but also open enough to really have an impact as a working tool? So what does it mean, large-scale group facilitation? What does it mean to understand collective dynamics, collective structures of consciousness, collective agreements, collective unconscious dynamics? And for that, we want to create a multidisciplinary path where people from different fields, like people from the field of therapy, of course, but also medicine, genetics, social sciences, education, law, and then, of course, systemic work and trauma work. And so different streams will create different departments where people that are more experts in the fields will come together and shine a light onto the collective trauma principle from different angles. And then we are working on establishing an online open source document where groups that we call kind of local voices or local pocket groups, as we said. So there's the main organization, and then there are local groups where already some of them are forming themselves, so that locally people will explore, okay, how is the impact of collective trauma in our country? What is the scar in the tissue of the world or the part of the world that we live in? And what is the impact onto individuals' lives and collective dynamics in our country, in our culture, in our social fabric? What's the impact? What's the cultural architecture that comes out of collective traumatization in our culture? And so we are creating this online document where all the groups around the world will fill in, the authorized groups will fill in the latest insights, difficulties, ways of working, ways how it doesn't work, so that we can learn from each other, and that we have a global communication platform that is openly accessible for everybody on the webpage, and everybody can read about the latest developments of the Pocket Project, but also a collection of scientific papers, of video recordings, kind of a video library where people that are experts in different fields that have something to say to this topic will be, at least some of them will be interviewed, and we have a library. And we are planning on conferences, and we are planning also on doing the first pocket, like collective trauma integration training that starts in June. It's a 1-year training with 2 meetings in person and online meetings in between, for people that are called to explore collective trauma or be facilitators of larger scale group events or local pocket groups, and where I will bring in lots of the research, my own research and my own work, and then we will explore, when we work with it, what is actually the outcome. So yeah, it's a rich organization with lots of potential, and as I said, it's a non-profit organization that also lives off the fact that people feel called to contribute, volunteer, and then also we are very much interested, what does this mean for preventive methods in hot areas, in crisis areas? How do we work with collective trauma when it happens, and with the after effects of collective trauma when it happened already? And then also, what does it mean to work with collective forces? Because these are strong forces that are stored in our collective basement, which means the people who are facilitators and work with it on a more global or collective base need to be in a kind of a healthy, sustainable inner state. And I believe that working on collective trauma needs that we have a certain amount of transpersonal insight, because that gives us the resource to witness and become aware of collective trauma structures. So it also includes an inner practice, a spiritual practice. And I believe another very important thing is that we are contemporary witnesses. And the fact, as I said earlier on, that on my phone, I receive messages of events that happen in the world, most probably right now as we speak, that are really hard to witness. And the fact that we can intellectually digest what we read in papers, in newspapers, or see in television doesn't mean that we witness it. A real witnessing means that I, as a whole being, which includes my body, my emotions, my thoughts, my capacity to stay related, and also my spiritual capacities to be part of a holistic witnessing. And I believe when we heard news about Syria or other parts in the world, that might challenge our capacity to stay connected to what we hear, what we see, what we intellectually digest. And therefore, I believe that a true global witnessing is such an enormous capacity, because first of all, it challenges each and every one of us with our own history. But then also, it challenges us to develop a global caring. And the global caring means also the inner consciousness dimension that the global caring arises out of as a true longing, not just as a moral implication because we should, no, because I want. And why? Because I feel. If we feel for each other, we care for each other. And I think we're living in a world where the complexity of a global system might be so overwhelming that we shut down and we say, okay, I'm overwhelmed. Yes, we are overwhelmed, and we need to look at the intelligence of overwhelm and kind of shut down. At the same time, we are also growing into a global citizenship, which means witnessing, true witnessing means also a global awareness. And I believe certain events will be repetitive as long as not so many people see it. That we intellectually process it doesn't mean that we saw it. If I don't feel it, and if I cannot represent it in me, I didn't see it really. And I believe that's why certain cycles happen again and again. And that's why one of the most dangerous aspects, which is indifference, can prevail. And so true global social witnessing means I cannot truly witness and be indifferent. And I think there are many movements right now in the world that we are literally living in a time that is an evolutionary jump. Technology, science, spiritual development, many social movements are going to happen in the next decades. And it needs us to be a connected, related part. And that's why I think the collective trauma work in shadow work is actually giving us back the capacity to truly care and to truly be part of a world that a social and cultural architecture, a house that we build together that we want to live in. If we create a cultural house, so let's create a cultural house that we really want to live in. That is a house for our companies, institutions, our healing centers, a house for our families, and education system, and political systems that we want to live in. And so we are all of us are the architects. So it's up to us.
Great, thank you, Thomas. I wonder if, just before I give some final details about the project and the training and so on, I wonder if there's any last thing you want to say about the higher levels of consciousness that are so essential to do this work and to sustain working with such big energies that we encounter in collective trauma.
It's the same like in our own life. I mean, we might walk through our life until one day we meet somebody, we read a book, we hear kind of something on the radio, or we just walk in nature and suddenly there's a kind of a flash and suddenly I understand something. Suddenly I see a part of me that was so me that I couldn't see it. And this can be anything, a way of behaving, a way of thinking, a way of feeling, a way of interacting, an addiction, a way of living intimate relationship, or a way of looking at world processes. And suddenly I get it. From the day that I got it, usually there is something new, which means even if I cannot immediately change it, there's the capacity to witness. There's the capacity that what was once in my camera, which means part of my perspective, part of me, is now within me, which means I can see it. And from that day on, the potential is rising that I will be able to change it. And I believe that's the same for collective dynamics, that because we have been born into it, we have been born into a system that made up a lot of connections in our brain and in our nervous system. We have been wired by a reality, and we learn from that reality. We learned it through our teachers. We learned it through the books that we read. We learned it by witnessing how people interact with each other and how they interact with us and we with them. So there is like the individual and the collective are inherently interwoven. And that's why it's so important, like an inner practice that helps me to create space to listen and to see, I believe is part of collective health and sanity. That we have to, and if it's that I take a walk in the park, that I have time to sit and contemplate, or that I listen to music, that I create space in my life to have moments to listen to my life. And so that's very helpful for me because I might discover aspects about my life that are very interesting. And so I believe when we do this collectively and we create spaces together where we reflect the insights that we have about living together, but also the difficulties that we have with living together, the difficulties that we all might have by being overwhelmed by so much information, by so much stuff that happens in the world that lands on our kind of digital devices, that's not easy. That's clear, because we are witnessing often difficult things, and then we label it negative news. But there are no negative news. The news become negative in me. So that's my relation to what I see, that I label negative news, as if this was something that happens outside of me. But deeply inside of me, it's my experience. So it's my struggle to find a relation to what I read. And this says nothing about how things are being presented to me. This says something about the things that are being presented to me. And so I believe in our age, as a global citizen, with a digital access, I'm being kind of exposed to a lot of material. I can create a bubble around me, but still this is happening in the world, and we are more and more connected. But I think this has a reason. This has a reason because we also need it. We also have to solve issues together as a global family that needs the technology. And so I believe that also in the Pocket Project, but also in the training program, we are going to look at practices, techniques, ways of working that train our interior to develop competencies. And some of the competencies are new. I believe some of the competencies are new because our age is new. Like the technological time is new. And so this means that evolution calls us. It calls us to deal with our past, because these are pipes that are maybe not fully open and therefore stuck. And it calls us to learn. It calls us to learn new things in order to be part of a time that is changing. So we are called into change. And if we have heavy metal shoes, change most probably is harder because we can't walk. So we need to take care of our metal shoes, but we also need to look at our willingness to change our lives in order to be part of where the world's going to. And that's why I think we also a certain amount of inner practice is crucial, because that inner practice can give me stability, can give me the inner anchoredness to take on leadership, creative leadership, co-creative leadership in our world. And it gives me enough inner stillness and space to also be inspired where we are going, where I'm going, but also where institutions are going that live from my leadership, where my contribution in the world's going. So that capacity of intuition and inspiration and innovation, I believe, needs a certain amount of space. And also, I believe collective trauma is also a jungle that we need to go into with a certain amount of not knowing, because we have heard of something living in that jungle, but we don't know what it is. So we are going in also with a certain amount of not knowing, because I believe the jungle hasn't been explored properly yet. So maybe that's enough.
Great, thank you, Thomas. Yeah. And as someone who's been studying with you intensively for 5 years now, I also want to bear witness to everyone that this work brings a profound transformation of our whole perception of reality, as well as our participation in life. It's really a very deep path to walk. And this is what Thomas is bringing to our work with collective trauma. So just a few practical details. All the information that you would need about the project is on the website, which is www.pocketproject.org. And you'll also find there some wonderful videos, video dialogues we've conducted and recorded between Thomas and some really interesting people. You'll also find contact information. So if you have questions, you can address them to us via the website. There's all the information about the training program and quite a thorough application form that quite a few people have already completed. So everything about the training is on the website. And last but not least, we've just recently opened a donation possibility. As Thomas has said, this is a not-for-profit initiative, and all of us working voluntarily. And your donations are going to be incredibly important for two reasons. One, they will help us build the infrastructure of the project, which is gradually getting bigger and bigger. And secondly, and very significantly, we are really committed to supporting people from beyond the US and Europe to come to the training. And we have contacts through people in our field with a number of remarkable people working in hot conflict or trauma zones who really want to come to the training, and we're very committed to helping support them financially. So all of your donations, small or large, will be extremely welcome and very well used. So thank you everyone for being with us for this introductory information session. We look forward to working with you, hopefully training with you. Thank you, Thomas, very much for being the inspiration and guide of this project. And from all of us here, bye for now. Thank you.